Hi and welcome to my channel, Selena Style Designs. I'm Selena, the interior designer, stylist and furniture refinisher behind the channel. So today I'm going to be bringing you a great little makeover on these really quite beautifully made bedsides but rather dated and scuffed up. And I'm going to transform them into a modern day beauty. Today I'm going to be testing out the Dixie Belle Silk Mineral paint, and I'm really excited to see how this colour that I'm using, which is Oyster, works out on these bedsides. So if you want to see this transformation, continue watching. Here are the bedsides that I'm working on today, and you can see that they're pretty well made. The timber is actually in pretty good condition except some of the varnish has lifted off, and I can tell that the timber graining underneath is going to be really beautiful once sanded off, and I've just got to make sure that I clean up all the scuff marks and really give it a good prep work to make sure that the paint adheres well. So I'm first going to start on an 80 grit sanding paper to make sure that I remove all that old varnish that's lifted, and I'm going really gently over the sides to make sure that I keep this beautiful beveling detailing as well. Once I finish sanding with the orbital sander on those corners, I then switched to hand sanding just to get those clean edges on the lines of the tops. So you'll notice that I'm using a sanding pad just to sand off these edges, and I find that in order to keep cuss down, I like to just reuse as much as other sanding pads as I can, because sometimes you don't always use it to the full max in the orbital sander. So I'm just using them to clean off the edges on my piece here. Once I finished that top, I've just gone down now and cleaned up and removed all those scuff bumps and scratches on the bottom base of the bedsides as well. Had I not done this prep work now, when I painted it, it would have shown all the lines and marks, and it really wouldn't have made a really good quality piece at the end. Definitely recommend taking the time and just making sure that all the piece is smooth everywhere, because the silk paint does seem to show a lot more because it is a smoother finish. So you want to make sure that you've got no bumps and lines as you're painting the pieces, because they'll really highlight through in the paint. Now moving on to the last sanding grit of 240, just to give it that really smooth finish. And here are the finished bedsides. So they're looking pretty good. They look a bit spotty right now, but the timber grain has come out really well, and I love that the beveling detail is still highlighted, and I think once this is painted and stained, it's going to look spectacular. So the next thing is moving on to the cleaning. So I'm just using sugar soap here to remove all the dirt and dust from both the top of the timber and on the sides and insides of the bedsides. I find I generally spend about an hour and a half for all the prep work and the sanding and the cleaning to make sure that it's all ready for the next stage, which is colour and staining. Here I'm using a Driftwood water-based stain, and this is by a Australian company called Pureco, and I love using this finish because it gives it a really soft, cool colour, but it still highlights the timber grain and texture underneath. So I pretty much just apply this with a old paintbrush, and I just kind of brush it all in, and I make sure to go with the grain and against the grain to make sure that it absorbs evenly and throughout the timber as well. Because it is porous, you want to make sure that you're getting into all those little nooks and crannies, and by brushing it against and with the grain, you're helping it absorb into all those parts as well. Once I've applied that stain, I then just use a cloth and wipe away the excess. And you can see the colouring just really looking quite lovely there. So here is one bedside all stained and finished, and then I've got the raw on the other side. So I love it. It's quite a subtle texture change, but it does make quite a big difference from when you do have the paint colour applied. You want to make sure that you're finding a balance between the timber warmth and the colour of the paint that you select as well. So I'm just letting that dry in the afternoon for a little bit, and then I'm going to bring these inside and start on the next phase, which is the painting. So before I move on to the painting, I'm just taping out all my insides to make sure that I get some really lovely clean lines. As I'm selling this piece, I want to make sure that I'm offering a really high quality piece. By making sure that I tape out the sides, I'm going to ensure that the paint has a really sharp line and it looks really good when I'm selling the piece to potential customers as well. And here I'm just taping out the top to make sure that the paint doesn't bleed through to my timber finish. Now we move on to testing out the Dixie Belle Silk Mineral paint. So here I'm using Oyster, which is a lovely soft cool grey, and it does apply quite thickly on. You can see the coverage is already really strong. It already has a colour blocker and primer all in one, so there's no need to prime this piece before painting. So I'm alternating between two brush sizes. So one is a smaller artist paintbrush, and I find this is a lot easier to get into the insides, and it also is great for the feet when I'm painting them as well, because it just applies more of the paint without it splashing anywhere. I also find it really good for when I'm cutting in. So when I'm doing the drawers, I will tend to go and use my small paintbrush first, and that way I'm getting in all the sides and I'm not sort of applying it too heavily, because you don't want to have any drip marks on these sides and edges. And then I'll go in on the top front with my thicker synthetic brush. If only painting was this fast in real life. Here is the first coat all applied, and it's looking really good. And I'm just going to let that dry for 2 hours and then move on to the next coat. So I'm just lightly sanding the tops to make sure that this helps with the paint and it gives it that really smooth finish. Want to make sure that you're going not too heavy on these brush strokes, because the second coat is where the brush marks will start showing through. So I'm just kind of lightly feathering and just not putting too much pressure on my hand when I'm painting it down onto the bedsides. And I'm also making sure to go evenly in one direction, which is up and down position. And here is the finished result after the second coat. So it's looking really good. There's not any brush marks, and I can't wait to see what this looks like all finished. So I'm just gonna let these dry for another 2 hours, and then next up is moving on to attaching the new hardware. Here I'm using a lovely Resin Hardware pool that has some really interesting kind of boning detailing on the inside, and it has a really nice brass banding around just to add some extra warmth and glam as well. So my last step in the refinishing process is adding in the hemp oil on the top of the timber to give it a really nice conditioning, and it just seals that timber finish really well, and it just has a nice matte sheen that matches the finish of the paint as well. I absolutely love how these bedsides turned out. They're worlds away from what I originally started with, and I'm so glad that I spent the time and the care in really sanding down the top and all those scuff marks, because if you're wanting to go for a higher price point, you really want to make sure that everywhere is smooth. So all that time and care in the very beginning, doing all that prep work, is crucial, and I think it really paid off on these bedsides. And the color that I chose, the Dixie Belle Oyster, was actually the perfect color. It has a soft, cool gray tone, and it just really balanced up with the timber top in that driftwood coloring as well. And with that resin hardware with the little accent of brass, was just the perfect touch. So now let's break down the costings. The bedsides themselves cost me $50 from Facebook Marketplace, and the materials were about $15 all up. The hardware was my biggest costings, and that was $63 all up. And you really want to consider, is this something I want to invest in, and is it worth considering for the furniture item that I'm flipping? And in my case, I think it absolutely is. I find it really elevates the look, and I want to make sure that I'm offering a really beautiful, high quality piece of furniture to my customers. So if you add all those materials, it ended up being $128 for my costings. I sold this piece for $400, and that gave me a profit of $272. I love working working on bedsides because I think they're a piece that everyone's always looking for, and you can really experiment and have some fun with the color choices and the hardware selections as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. So make sure you like and subscribe, and the next video I'm going to be sharing with you is a bit more of a behind the scenes on how I set up my staging studio and some styling tips of how I stage my pieces for sale on Facebook Marketplace as well. So stay tuned for that video, and I'll see you next time.